I used to be a math teacher, both in the junior colleges in Singapore and some secondary school, and of course I was a lecturer as a professor at NIE. And my teaching philosophy for math was fairly simple. I said, you don't know the concept? I do, I'm the expert. Let me explain that concept as clearly as possible to you. Let me structure my lessons, my lecture, engage you properly, show you lots of examples, give you the right explanations, so that once you get it, you can use that knowledge to apply. It's an age-old method that is very intuitive. We all use it. 95% of instruction still happens in the same mode, which is direct instruction. But the thing I found when I was teaching was, students appeared to understand. Students even said that Mr. Manu at the time, oh, you're a good teacher, we understand you. But when you probe their understanding just outside of what you'd covered in the curriculum, in the lecture, it was almost as if they don't know anything at all. Everything in, they could do. Slightly outside, oh no, what happened? Right? So the understanding, so it's not like they were not getting anything, they were getting something, but it was very fragile, it was very shallow, and it didn't transfer to anything outside. So the deep understanding and transfer aspects were missing. Right? So that led me in part to my PhD, where I wanted to understand, why does this happen? Right? And one of the most seminal articles that came out around 40 years ago even, right? So this is the state of education practice. We have known this for about more than 4 decades, why well-taught mathematics courses can still lead to disastrous results. And a word on mathematics. People like to study mathematics not because it's a well-structured domain, although that is true, but math is, from a cognitive standpoint, especially abstract and hard to learn. Right? It's not like language or other domains. So if you can understand the architecture of mathematical cognition, the argument goes that you perhaps can translate it better to other domains anyways, right? So that's the focus on math, and my focus has been on math as well. All right, so this is Professor Schoenfeld out of Berkeley. He went to classrooms of very good instructors, very good lecturers, known to be very good. So, and he attended those, his and his research team. And yes, by all means, these were very good lectures. They explained very well, very well structured, so on and so forth. He asked students, did you understand what the lecturer was trying to say? Students said, yes, your evaluation of teaching, but more than that, like students really reported, yes, I understood what the lecturer was trying to say. He got peers in to sit in those lectures, and same again. The peers said, yeah, faculty assessment was, this is a very good teacher. Same thing. When you come out of it and you start probing students' understanding, he found that the understanding was very fragile, very shallow. So the question is, how is it? I mean, of course, we all understand that if you learn poorly from bad lectures, it's not rocket science. I'm okay, I understand that. But how is it that people were learning poorly from well-taught mathematics courses, right? And so as a scientist, if you want to investigate this, the problem of learning is not that we learn poorly from bad lectures. Please do not give bad lectures. The problem of learning is the counterintuitive idea or evidence that we learn poorly from even very good ones. That is the problem that we're trying to solve. That is the problem that I started to attack in my PhD studies 20 years ago. Okay? Why is it so? It's so intuitive that we should be learning. It's right there in front of you. Yet, we don't. Why is it? Okay? So that's the problem that we're trying to. So let's try to understand the why. Because if you can articulate the problem, that's the first step. But then you need to understand what the problem is and why it occurs. So I'm going to give you like a very high level, this is not a sciencey talk, but it's a very high level analysis of what happens and why it happens. So the first is the idea of seeing, of noticing things. So when you're trying to understand something new, you need to notice things. Okay? Imagine you are watching a movie. You're in a cinema. You're watching a movie. It's a very entertaining, very engaging movie. Now imagine the person sitting next to you is an acclaimed director, an expert at making movies. You both watch the same movie. You're both happy. You come out. You find me there and I ask you a question. Did you see the same movie as the director? You say, yeah, of course, Manu, I was sitting next to them. Of course I saw the same movie. I said, okay, But did you see what the director saw in that movie? And then, if you think about it, the answer should be, chances are no. Yes, it was right in front. The same stimulus was right in front of you, but the expert saw things that were right in front of you, yet you could not see them. And we also know from decades of research comparing experts and novices that experts see different things. They see deep structure of the domain. They see the underlying critical features that are important. They could be right in front of you, but you don't see them. So that's the nature of expert knowledge is very different, because that knowledge helps you see things. So seeing is not simply a perceptual exercise. I wish it were. It would make teaching so much easier. I just put it in front of you and you see it. And this analysis or this finding goes across domains. You could be seeing a piece of art, you could be reading poetry, you could be looking at engineering diagrams, you could be looking at mathematical proofs. It does not matter what the stimulus is. Experts see the deep structure, whereas novices do not. Because seeing is not simply a perceptual exercise, it is a cognitive one. We see with what we know. And if you just understand this basic finding, which has been around for many, many years, many decades actually, it forces you to rethink how you start to think about your teaching and learning. If seeing is something that you require knowledge, because that's the paradox in the context of teaching. If you want to teach a novice who does not know something new, and you know that they need to have knowledge to see what you're trying to show them, yet it is precisely that they do not have, you're caught between a rock and a hard stone, right? How do you do? What do you do? So the first job of teaching a novice something new is actually not to teach, is not to tell. It's actually to find out a way that will prepare them to see. The telling, your expert knowledge is still important, obviously, because that expert knowledge is important. But preparing to see that is perhaps even more important. Otherwise, it goes to waste. Or it's not optimal. Okay? So that's the first reason. Novices in your classrooms are looking at the same entertaining, engaging, clear lectures that you present, but they're not seeing what you as an expert are seeing in them. So the first job is to prepare novices to see. If you can solve that, we solve a big chunk of the problem. Second problem is one of connecting. So even if you see things, you need to be able to connect it with your priors, with what you already know. Assuming, in the seeing process, I've already got you prepared to see those things, how do I get you to connect and integrate new knowledge into your priors? And here I'm going to give you a toy example to illustrate the point. Okay? I'm going to give you a memory test. Is that okay? You don't have a choice. You just okay? So it's a memory test. I'm going to give you statements, about 9 statements, or maybe 10, of who did what. So somebody did something, and you have to remember all of them. I'm just going to give you enough time to read them. So you have to memorize as you read them. All right? Welcome to the test. Ready? This is going to go very quickly. Go. Okay, time's up. Yeah. Did you tell you it was a test, right? I'm just being as kind to you as you are to your students. So, recall who did what. Right? You can do it individually. You can just do it in your head. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. But as you're doing it, I can tell you what roughly the pattern of a recall would be. Most of you would recall about, maybe in this group is smarter, so maybe you would recall about half of them, maybe 5. Some of you maybe even 6. But I think the average is around 4 to 5. I could also tell that you're more likely to remember the first couple and the last couple. Right? And you're probably also likely to remember something that really resonates with you. So if you like dance, you might remember the dance. If you like music, you might remember the music. If you like me, sport, then I will remember the football guy, right? Okay. So I can So this is the pattern effect, nothing surprising. Now imagine, so this is like, okay, 50, 60% performance. Not too bad, right? What if I said, I'll give you another set of 10 statements, 9 statements, and I guarantee you, each one of you will remember each one of them effortlessly. Effortlessly. Would you bet with me on that? Well, good you don't, because I'm going to make this happen, all right? I'm going to make you memory geniuses, and remember 9 statements effortlessly, and this time we'll go faster. So you're going to have to read very fast, okay? Ready to become memory geniuses? Here we go. Okay, time's up. All right? Is there anybody who doesn't remember anything? Of course, you're not going to put up your hand now, right? So see, it's the same. You're the same person, the same memory architecture, the same cognitive capacity, the same working memory, trying to process new information. What happened? How come you went from, C student to A+? What did I do? I know this is a trivial toy example, but what did I do? I simply connected the knowledge with what I think are your priors. I just activated that. And what prior knowledge does, when you activate, and we all talk about, and I'm sure this is not new to this group, activation of priors. But what activation of prior does, A, it helps you process information faster. The load is reduced. And B, once that knowledge has been activated, it gives you hooks to connect new knowledge with. Right? And both are critical for understanding and eventually being able to retrieve it. Right? So we've done 2 problems so far, right? The problem of seeing, and then the problem of activating or connecting with your priors, so that helps you process new information, and also understand it better. Okay? Now the problem is one of transfer. You don't need to just see it, you need to understand it, but you also be able to apply it to novel contexts. Right? And that's the idea of transfer. Because I can't give you all contexts within which you can apply potentially your knowledge. You learn math, science, art, history, whatever. I can only teach you in so many ways, but the application context could be really vast. Right? So how do I teach you in a way that whatever it is that you learn, you can use it in a number of contexts? And transfer is the holy grail. We know from research, transfer is very hard and very rare. Okay? So just to illustrate that, again, imagine this is a carpentry shed. You have the master and the apprentice. Suppose the master comes, when the apprentice comes, the master says, wait a minute. I'm happy you want to learn carpentry, but before you do that, I want you to go and learn mathematics. Because for carpentry, geometry, numbers, measurement, these are very, very important. So go pick up some math courses, ace those, and then you can try carpentry. Oh, by the way, you should also do some physics. Because, equilibria and dynamics, all of those are very important. Make sure you study physics as well. Oh, and chemistry, because you'll be dealing with materials, and materials have a habit of interacting with each other, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then maybe take some courses in, economics. You're going to be dealing with customers and business and so on and so forth. Once you've done all of that, then you come to carpentry, and I'll teach you teach whatever it is that's needed in the activity of carpentry. The other way is, come to the carpentry shed. We will learn all about carpentry and the underlying knowledge and skills in the domains as you practice, as you engage in the activity of carpentry. And this is a very fundamental idea in cognition. We are used to thinking that knowledge is independent of the context within which it was learned. And by context, I mean what you were doing, where you were, who you were interacting with, how did it feel like. So the idea here is that knowledge is intricately tied to whatever it is you're doing at the time. And by doing, I mean listening. I hope some of you are. That's a kind of doing. Thinking, reflecting is also a kind of doing. Solving problems or taking notes, that's also a kind of doing. Building things, that's also a kind of doing. Designing things, that's also a kind of doing, right? So they're all different kinds of doings. The knowledge, the same knowledge that's learned through different kinds of doings gets situated in those doings. Okay? And that's create this, because once it does that, you have a problem of transfer. Because if the doings in the context of learning, like a classroom or a lecture hall, if they're very different from the doings in the context of use, where you have to apply, then the same knowledge is unlikely to transfer to that context. Right? So knowledge is not like a file on the computer. Once you have it, you can retrieve it. No, it gets tied to the context, the practices, the place, everything. Okay? And so, how do you solve this problem of transfer? You don't have to have a full overlap between the context of learning versus context of use, but you have to create enough of an overlap that the knowledge becomes flexible and adaptable to the new context. I call this the home advantage effect. You know, that if you follow sport, you always know that teams do better at home than away. Right? Unless you're Manchester United, who are doing terribly right now. Although we won at home at the weekend, so some saving grace. Right? The idea is, because it's the same players, same skill set, same level of expertise, but when you train and perform at home, you encode the entire set of practices and the context and the surroundings in your training. So that when you have to perform in the same context, the performance is a lot better than if you move to a new stadium and new sets of fans, new sights and sounds and everything, the new dimensions, new perspectives. Just makes it a little bit harder. Doesn't mean it's not possible, just makes it a little bit harder, right? And knowledge is like that. It has the home advantage effect. So as a teacher, as a designer of learning, one needs to keep that in mind, that you can help students see things if you prepare them. You can help students understand things if you activate their prior knowledge. And you can help them transfer knowledge if you design the context within the practices within the learning context to overlap with the practices within the use context, right? So these are the three problems fundamentally. There are many more problems, but let's attack these three problems. These are the three problems of learning that we need to be able to solve so that you can help students learn deeply, right? Again, at this point, if you just think about these three problems and reflect on your own teaching practice, I think you'll make great inroads into how you could change that. I now step into the science part, a little bit of the science part. Okay, what does science have to say about how we might go about solving this? Again, science did not have such a linear path towards solving this problem. So I'm bringing together bodies of evidence that go back 40, 50, even 100 years to bring to bear, to try to understand how we might solve these problems. Okay? So the first big idea that I want to give you is the idea of scaffolding. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with scaffolding, right? So Vygotsky, more than 100 years ago, Russian psychologist, or Soviet psychologist at the time. And the idea is, if you want to learn and grow, you can't be in the inner circle, which is things you can do without any help. All of us have things we can do without any help. If you're in that and if you stay in that green zone, you will not learn and grow. You will just be able to do what you know. You should also not be in the outside zone, which is the pink zone. I hope it appears pink. Yeah. Because there, even with help, you won't be able to do. Right? So where learning and growth happens is in the middle zone, where you can't do without any help. But if help is provided, then you might be able to learn and grow. So all learning, all new learning, all growth happens in this zone. It's a theoretical idea. Right? The question is, from a practical standpoint, how do you know that you've entered the zone? If I give you a task and you're able to do it successfully, can I say you've entered the zone? No, because you've done it successfully yourself. So I make the task harder. And you're still able to do it successfully. Have you entered the zone? No. I have to keep on making the task harder and harder still until what? Until I see that you are not able to do that successfully. Vygotsky doesn't talk about it this way, but the way to know that you've entered the zone is not through success. Success does not give you that information. It is failure. You have to have information about what is it that a child or a novice is not able to do. And that is the information you can get through failure. Of course, it's good to know what the child or the novice is able to do. But to make sure that you're in the zone of proximal development, you need to have information about failure. In other words, that's your first task, to determine that you're entering the zone and make the learner enter the zone. And that's through failure. Okay? This is more than 100 years ago. Okay? The second is, once the learner is in that zone, according to Vygotsky, we must scaffold them. Because that's the zone. It's through scaffolding that the person learns. So how much do we scaffold? Imagine a child who's learning how to walk, right? It's on the floor, starts to get up, and then falls down. Starts to get up, takes a couple of steps, falls down. Clearly, the child is not able to walk yet, right? Learning to walk. Are they in the zone? Yes, I have direct behavioral information about failure. They're not able to walk independently. What do I do next? Do I hold both their hands and make them walk? Come. So I'm holding both of their hands. I'm not holding right now because I'm holding a mic, but imagine I'm holding both their hands and I bring them to point B. They somehow walk. That's one option. The other is I could hold a pinky. Let's say, young person, make the effort. So they hold the pinky, they pull up, and I just keep my pinky so that they can walk a little bit. Which one do I do? A or B? As a teacher, what would you do? Not as a kind person, okay? As a teacher. According to Vygotsky, the idea should be B, minimal guidance. Why? Is it because we are unkind or evil? No. Because learning and growth happens as long as the bulk of the effort, whether it's cognitive or motor or physical effort, remains on the learner, the person who's trying to learn. We are very kind people as teachers, and we tend to support them a bit too much. So let's not be that. Let's be theoretically sound. Always, so I tell teachers, it's very counterintuitive for teachers. Your job is to get away with the least, provided they don't give up. So it's a delicate balance, right? You've got to keep them in the game, but not give them too much. Because the goal of learning is the bulk of the effort has to be on the learner. And you can use this principle to answer any questions about tool use, by the way, like AI. If you're in the learning zone, this is a very simple principle. If you're learning how to write, and you're a novice, and you're using AI to write, terrible idea. Because the bulk of the effort is done by AI, not you. You will never learn to write. And when you do maximal guidance like that, maximal support, that scaffold actually becomes a crutch. You can never operate without it. Now you can make other fundamental assumptions that, oh well, if that crutch is part of you forever, okay, you never need to learn. That's a different argument. But from a learning standpoint, if you really want to learn, then the support has to be, for learning and growth, the support has to be guided, right? So that's scaffolding. Okay? Next. We also have tried to understand, there's a huge body in developmental psychology, was tried to understand how children learn new things. Because the first 7 to 10 years of our lives are some of the steepest learning curves. And from a cognitive standpoint, and also from a developmental standpoint, if we can start to understand these processes, maybe we can try to also optimize future learning. Right? So I think that's one of the ideas, at least for me. So there's a very strong effect called the play effect. When people have studied toddlers or 3 to 5-year-old children's learning, playing with toys. So just to illustrate this, I'll divide you into two groups, okay? Just down the middle here, this is group 1. And then this is group 2. Come on, play with me. Right? This is group 1, then this is group 2. Okay, now imagine we're all young kids who love to play with toys, right? So I come to you and I say, hey kids, here's a new toy. You've never seen it, you've never played with it. Would you like to play with it? Okay, not terribly enthusiastic. Sorry, you got to do something about them. Okay. I say, okay, fine. I give you the toy, and you say, I play as you like. Okay, so you play, and I observe. And I come to group 2, and I say, hey kids, here's a new toy. You've never seen it, you've never played with it. Would you like to play with it? Yes. Much more enthusiastic. Oh, although some of the backbenchers, maybe not. Huh? And I say, no, wait. This is the first time you're seeing this or playing with this toy. Let me first teach you how to play with this toy. Watch and learn, okay? If you do this, then this happens. You can do this with this toy, etc., etc. So I teach you how this new toy is. And I then say, okay, now you have it. You have more information than those people. Play as you like. And I observe how you play. Right? So if I ask you a question now, who do you think will spend more engaged with the toy? Even though they were less enthusiastic. Strange, right? Who do you think will invent more strategies to figure out how the toy works? Again, group 1. Right? Who would be more creative? That's part of related. In fact, up to 3 times more creative in using this toy. I think group 1, right? And that's exactly what the broad stroke of research actually suggests. In fact, Gopnik and Work, who won the Nobel Prize for, effectively the Nobel Prize for Cognitive Science, the Rommel Hart Prize, they've shown that children almost behave like scientists. They apply the hypothetical deductive methods naturally to understand how the toy, the causal analysis of the toy. Very sophisticated. This is already built in. Imagine. Now imagine knowledge and concepts and ideas, not as physical toys, but conceptual toys. Part of our deep understanding, creativity, critical thing, all of these things that we want. How do we teach? If you are honest, do we teach group 1 or group 2? NTU is special. Huh? I'll leave that answer to yourself, right? But the point is instructive, that there is something about playing and tinkering, even before learning, that there is something powerful about it. I'm not suggesting group 1 left to their own devices will figure everything out. But there is something about playing and tinkering before learning. Because when psychologists studied group 2, they found that the creativity levels were 1/3 of this group. Even though this group had more knowledge about how to play with the toy and how the toy exactly works. So there's something about it, right? Okay, so that's children. People studied adults, and in particular, cognitive science has been enamored with memory, obviously, because that's the basic architecture. So people try to understand, how does a memory work? How can we enhance memory? And so on and so forth. So there's this very well-established effect called the generation effect. And it goes something like this, okay? Let me divide you again into group 1s and group 2, okay? So you have group 1, all right? I'm going to group 1 and say, I'm going to give you word pairs. You're going to have to remember word pairs, okay? You see a word pair there, the rapid, and that's the stem, and then the other part you have to generate, okay? I'm going to be kind to you, and I'm going to say, the word, the pair is actually a synonym of the stem, rapid. So you can already think of synonyms of rapid. I'm going to be even kinder and tell you that the first letter of the pair is F. Please generate. Fast. Okay, almost everybody gets it fast, right? And then, okay, so you all generated fast. Now I come to group 2, and I said, don't bother generating. Let me just tell you, right? This is group 2. Sorry, you're in group 2 for this lecture. I'll just give you rapid, fast. And I'm going to give you 40 of these and same for 40 of those or whatever, right? A number of them. But each time, the only difference is I give them the stem with a couple of hints that are designed that you generate the correct answer. And you go through 40 of these. And I say, you guys don't bother generating. I'll just give you rapid, fast, tap, 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 tap. Just try to remember in the same amount of time. Okay? Once you're all done, after a while I give you a test. Who do you think would remember more? Very strange, right? You had more time to study and understand, even make your own associations, more connections. You had more time. But there is something about generating information, knowledge, before learning the correct one. I still showed you the correct one. It was just a trick to get you to generate the correct one. So there's something about generation is a very powerful mechanism, and we can go into the science and try to understand from a physiological, neural, and behavioral perspective. I'm not going to go into there, but just top line, it's a very important mechanism to get people to generate. But it's very hard. In these experiments, it's easier to, okay, let me help you generate the correct answer. But normally it's very hard to design everything in a way that you can generate the correct answer. So people have studied, what if you don't generate the correct answer? So there's this big body of research that I call the failed generation effect, or retrieval practice and other things that it's also called. So here it comes with a twist. I will come to group one, and I'll say, group one, the stem is, let's say, dog. Think of the pair. Not rhetorical, please. Some association. So I'm not giving you the association, I'm not giving you the first word. What's the first thing that comes to your mind as when you think of dog? Bone. Canine, animal. Cat. Okay. Oh, yeah. Good. Very good. A different kind of an association. What else? Companion. Okay. Good. All right. All of you are dead wrong. Because the word the association I wanted you to learn was mammal. Sorry. That was the association. That's the correct answer. Play with me, right? What do I do to this group? Dog, mammal. Remember it. Okay? Again, I do the same experiments. Several of these designed to make sure that you don't get to the correct answer. That's a critical difference. And they will be given the correct answer from the get-go. All they have to do is study and memorize it. How hard can that be? Then I test. You guys are eventually shown the correct answer, by the way, right? So I do tell you that's the correct association is mammal. And I test. What happens? Who does better? You see, now it starts to get interesting, right? But it still turns out that this group does significantly better. Okay? So it's not just generation. It is, even if you generate the wrong thing, provided you're corrected, you still remember that thing better. And from a very high level network retrieval perspective, it's understandable. Because when I ask them to say, oh, remember what was the association for dog? They have one path to that memory, which is mammal. For you, there are at least two parts. At least. Because you might have thought dog, animal. Oh, but animal was not the correct answer, it was mammal. So you have the path through the failed attempt, and you have the path to the correct attempt. You have both. So just from a retrieval perspective, the greater the retrieval paths, the more likely that you will remember. So failed generation actually makes a huge difference as well. Right? So if you're at a networking event, for example, right, you've got your name tags and everything. How do you introduce, how do you get to know each other? I would say, oh, hi, I'm Manu, and you are? Sheena. Okay, maybe she'll remember Manu, maybe I'll remember Sheena 6 months later. But if I walk up to her and say, hi, are you Anna?
No. I'm Sheena.
Oh, thank you. And then she does the same to me. And I say, hey, are you, whatever, invent a name.
Bob.
Bob. I'm Bob. I look like a Bob. Okay, I'm a Bob. It'd be a spectacular failure, but no, I'm Manu. Right, now, between these two cases, who would remember more? So, oh yeah, I met that lady. Oh yeah, I called her Anna, but she was Sheena. You see? So let's change all the networking events entirely. Right? Based on science, right? But that's the idea here. Failed generation is actually very, very powerful. Okay? So there's something about generating the wrong thing, even, before learning. All right? So, but that's still memory. Memory is, let's say, the basic element of cognition, but we need to go to higher level cognition as well. And that is what we call impulse-driven learning. So people have studied tutoring dialogues. Tutor and tutee sitting down together. The tutor is trying to explain new concepts to a tutee as the tutee is trying to solve certain problems. Perfectly normal tutor-tutee situation. What they found was when the tutor gave an explanation at a point where the tutee was not stuck, or at an impasse as they call it, the explanation led to no learning. Only when the same explanation came at a point where the tutee was stuck at an impasse, the same explanation led to learning. So again, your explanation is important, but timing it, there is something about getting stuck, because that sets up. So you see a pattern of results. Again, these are from very different aspects, different lines of inquiry in the cognitive and the psychological sciences. But the beauty is, over time, there are some patterns that start to connect, start to be complementary. There is something about failing that helps you enter the learning zone. There's something about generating before learning, playing and tinkering. There's something about even generating the wrong thing before learning. There's something about getting stuck and an impasse that helps you learn from the correct explanation at that time. And you bring it all this together, and that's how productive failure was born. Okay? And the idea was, if playing and tinkering, if generating even the wrong thing, if getting stuck and not being able to solve the problem any further, if all of these things are so important for learning, why do we wait for them to happen? What if we could deliberately design for failure, intentionally, in a safe way? What would that look like? And then bootstrap that for deep learning, for growth, right? And so that's a two-phase design. First is a problem-solving phase where we design activities which are intentionally challenging yet intuitive. But as I will show you, you will not be able to get to the correct answer. But you will be able to generate lots of incorrect or suboptimal answers. And once you've done that, that then can be consolidated. The expert can come in and teach and build on that, okay? So let me give you an example. So these are actually from Singapore schools, secondary schools, grade 8, 9 students learning the concept of standard deviation, right? So today is a lesson on standard deviation. All of your students, you don't know the concept. I'm going to teach you. One option is I can say, calculate the standard deviation of each football player. So there are 3 football players. Here are a number of goals they've scored over the years. Class, please calculate the standard deviation of each football player. And you go, huh? I've never heard the concept. Because you're novices, remember? You don't know this, right? Oh, it's standard deviation. I don't know what that is, right? And so then I say, okay, since you don't know, I have information about failure. You cannot do something. Let me teach you. Then I go into instruction. But what if I ask it another way? I say, hey, I know you don't know this concept yet, but here's some data. Invent as many ways of deciding amongst these 3 football strikers who's the most consistent one, mathematically. Okay? No technical terminology, standard deviation, anything like that. Just invent as many ways of deciding. Now what do you think you would do? Okay, another non-rhetorical question. Ideas. What would you do? First find the average. Okay, averages are very intuitive. What else might you do? highest to lowest, okay? Hey, there are no correct answers here. You can be kids. You can be kids who don't know standard deviation. What would you do? Yeah, maybe chart it, yes, yeah. What else? Sorry? Sort them. Okay, to see some kind of a pattern maybe. Good, yeah. Okay, so I'll show you what kids actually do, all right? This data comes actually from 4 different continents, thousands of kids, remarkably similar across cultures, but yeah. So they do totals and averages. I hope you're able to see them. Yeah, I think it's big enough, yeah. The thing is, we know that they're going to use totals and averages and medians and mode. So what do? We invite that knowledge, but we make the problem not solvable by that knowledge because we keep everything the same. Okay, so these are part of the design science, okay? Maybe later in the workshop, if you're attending, you'll go through. So there's a logic to designing these kinds of tasks that invite prior knowledge, but they make the problem not solvable. So you tried it, oh, it doesn't work. I can't make the decision, so you need to try something else. So you do tallying, and you can get a feel of the problem. Yeah, some are more clustered or bunched up. That's the language kids would use, right? But, okay, it's not mathematical enough, but you get a feel, like the group 1, playing with the new toy, right? Charting, right? So they go chart every year how the fluctuates, and you ask them, oh, if it goes up and down a lot, it's more inconsistent. So that's good. That's a good feel of the problem. You're playing with it, but can you be precise? Can you mathematize it, right? They take, I think, highest to lowest, right? We know that they're going to use it. It's very intuitive. We keep it the same. So you look at the totals, you can't solve the problem. You look at the central tendencies, you can't solve the problem. You look at the range, you can't solve the problem. In the middle, you're just playing, get a feel of the problem, right? They take year-on-year differences. Very intuitive solution, not to be found in any textbook, okay? And they add all the year-on-year differences, and they say, well, the higher this value, the more inconsistent. Some of them start to recognize that positive and negative high values are canceling each other out, which is not fair. They have an amazing concept of fairness, which we had never known of, but got activated in the process, right? And they ignore the signs. They say, let's ignore the signs. No mathematical talk about, oh, let's take absolute values or square them or something like that. No. Just let's ignore the signs and let's take the average fluctuation in the data. And that's the answer. Okay? Sometimes crazy things happen. This was a group of students who was asked to mathematize their graph, quantify it, be more precise. Right? And they said, okay, imagine I could hold the ends of the graph, each line graph. Imagine I could extend that into a rope. If I could calculate the length of that rope, the shorter would be the more consistent, right? Very intuitive. And what have they done? They've divided that into right-angle triangles, invoked our favorite Greek mathematician called Pythagoras, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, calculated the hypotenuses, added the length, 83.26, 56.54, 94.54. It's been 20 years and I've never bothered to check if it's correct. I've delivered this many times, but I've never checked it. You know why? Because the beauty is not, mathematics is not in the computation. The mathematics is in the play of imagination, creativity. This is what happens when you don't at first show group 2 how to play with the toy. This is what can happen. I'm not saying this naturally happens. This is what can happen. How do we design this? That's the question, right? And if after this, a teacher comes in and builds on it and tells them the correct way of solving those problems, could that be effective? And those are the kind of empirical work that we've done. We've compared productive failure with direct instruction and control experiments and classroom-based experiments in Singapore, in Europe, in the US, in Asia. And this is the broad stroke of what we found. I think I won't go into the theoretical matchup, but this is the broad stroke finding. If you look at their basic knowledge, things that are covered in the lecture, can they remember it? Can they solve problems using it? Both methods, productive failure and direct instruction, are very good at developing high levels of fluency. But when it comes to conceptual understanding and transfer, that's where productive failure students are significantly better. And the effect sizes are pretty strong. Okay? So you have two groups of students who appear very similar and very good on basic knowledge fluency, but they're very different in terms of how they understand it and how they transfer it. I call it the basic knowledge fallacy because there is somehow this notion that when something basic, like just the concept of standard deviation, could be the concept of a line or concept of whatever, because the information is so basic, it doesn't matter how the person learns it. Let me just tell you. Higher order cognitions like problem solving, deep understanding, creativity can be built on top of that. Whereas what we are increasingly finding is how you learn even the basics influences how well you can understand it and how you can use it. In fact, just like the toy example with the kids, when kids are taught the concept, mathematical concepts like standard deviation, and they're given the same football problem and say, invent as you like. Remember what I told you with the toy? You've learned how to play with the toy, now play as you like. The creativity is reduced. Because again, knowledge is not something you have it and you can use it freely. How you learned it, it gets situated, it's the depth of understanding, the flexibility of encoding, your ability to transfer, all of these get encoded, situated in the learning method itself, in the context and what you're doing. So the next time you hear, oh, it's just basic knowledge, let's just give it, we'll build this is foundational, we'll build the rest of it on top. No, you've already lost the battle if you don't change how you teach the basics. Okay? Another thing we get is, people say, oh, this is for high ability students, high performing students. And we've shown, at least in Singapore, which is a perfect from a variance sampling, you have kids who are very different in different schools. And we've shown that once you engage them in productive failure, the gap really closes. Precisely because we spend time activating your priors in a way that helps you learn. Okay? And a finding from the teachers that we get often is, yes, this is not easy to teach this way. It's very easy to let's say not very, but it's easier to deliver an expert knowledge. It's easier to deliver it well. But when you engage with students thinking, oh, why is that solution not working? Why is that year-on-year difference? What's wrong with that? Right? Those kinds of things, when you have to work with students' ideas, that's when your own domain knowledge gets invoked. That puts a greater burden. So teachers say, well, I thought I knew these simple mathematical concepts like standard deviation or lines or so on and so forth, but after going through productive failure, teaching it through productive failure, I understand them more deeply. Yeah? So it's not just students learning, it's teachers learning. Right? So all this that I've talked about is really predicated on three things that I want you to. So this is only a design for initial learning. It's when you first come to understand something new. That's the part that we're optimizing. There is still the need for elaboration and mastery. We have not talked about that. Okay, all that has to continue. This is just the initial learning. And it's a deliberate design for failure. It's not just, oh, let's engage in and hopefully failure happens. So for example, if you do design challenges, failure is bound to happen naturally. But this is deliberately designing for failure in the initial learning, right? And the finding that we have is the more they failed, the more they learned, because the more was the activation protocol. Again, it's not just me. We've done meta-analyses, found more than 160 odd experimental effects comparing productive failure with direct instruction. Across the world, only about 15 to 20% of the studies were mine. So it's really independently replicated, reproduced. And those of you in the social sciences, you know how big a challenge that is. Replicability and reproducibility of research in the social sciences. So it's one of those cases. And if we can do this to high fidelity, in other words, like I said, it's a question of design. Just throwing something would not work. You really have to design it, right? What are the aspects of the design? So these are the three layers of design that I call it. First is, how do you design these activities? I showed you an example, but what goes into it? Can I just throw anything? Or does it have to have certain features? Is there design science behind it? Yes, there is. Okay, but we're not going to go do that now. How do kids interact around this? How do you scaffold? How do you facilitate? Is there a science behind that? Or any kind of facilitation is fine? Yes, there is a particular way of doing that. And then productive failure does not happen in a vacuum. Because when you go into a classroom whose norms are about getting the correct answer, or if I'm struggling with something that means I'm not good, then those are very different norms. You've got to reset the expectations and norms that, so I'm very clear with students and teachers, I'm going to give you a challenging activity. It'll be reasonably fun even. You would be able to intuit a lot. But you won't be able to get to the correct answer. But I don't care about that. What I care is how much effort you put in. Right? So that's the expectation. So the success is how many ideas you can produce without worrying about getting it right or wrong. Okay? So I've taken that fear of getting right, of being wrong, rather, out of the equation. And only when you do this, and you do this well, effects show that if this is the unit that you learn from a good teacher over a year, if that's the learning gain, if you use productive failure well, design it well, implement it well, you can get up to 3 times that effect. Okay? And like I said, my work has been in mathematics, because mathematical cognition has particular features that are good to understand, harder to understand, but once I can convince math professors. Any math professors here? See, I told you. Math professors are the hardest to convince, because math is so abstract. They say, this is so abstract, I just need to tell you exactly what it is. Engineering, sciences, there's a lot of lived experience, in humanities and arts and so on. There's a lot of lived experience you can draw on to recognize or design for productive failure. But in math, no, it's very hard. It's like, I need to tell you because it's so abstract. Okay? And that's my proof of concept, or rather line of research, that even when things are very, very abstract, there is still a design for failure that can be very productive. Okay? Again, from a translation standpoint, it's been done, and it's now going into adult learning as well. Okay? So this was an example of a math professor at ETH Zurich. At ETH we have this, every freshman has to go through 3 pillars: math, physics, and computer science. And mathematics, one of the hardest mathematics courses there is called linear algebra. It is something that all students have to do. It's a bunch of numbers in rows and columns that come around in funny looking brackets, parentheses, and they are the underlying structure of a number of things, whether you're doing engineering to computer science to anything, right? And this is one of the toughest courses. So this is a course taken by about 650, 700 students. And it follows a regular lecture tutorial system, right? It's a year-long course, lecture, tutorial. And so we worked with the professor, math professor, and says, okay, Manu, how do I do this? Like, this is linear algebra. I need to teach them fundamental theorems and symbolic structures and so on and so forth. I said, no, okay, let's look at just, over the course of this year, 10 big ideas. 10 key things you want students to understand. And for those 10 things, before that lecture on those things, those ideas, let's design productive failure activities so that students can do them prior to your lecture. You don't even have to change your lecture. Just be yourself. But just design, let's design. So we designed a PhD student with my PhD student Vera Baumgartner. And we designed these pockets of 30 to 40 minutes of problem solving based on productive failure principles just before those key lectures, right? So the total intervention in what is like hundreds of hours of course time in the curriculum was only 8 hours, because it was just very surgical. The passing rate of this course is about 55%, because ETH has a system of easy to get in, hard to stay in. NUS is NTU, and Singapore is hard to get in, but easier to stay in, I think. That's the only reason I graduated. Okay? So it's a very small amount. How much do you think we could improve the percentage passing by? Think about it. Historically, it's always been, they keep it at 55%. How much do you think we could, just 8 hours out of hundreds, over the course of a year, spread out? What would you say would be enough for you to change your practice tomorrow? Okay, not a rhetorical question. I want you to put your percentage. Punt on it, come on. What would you be? 10%, and you will change your practice tomorrow. That was the question, right? Yeah.
75, at least 75 passing.
So you want historical average to go from 55 to 75 before you change your practice? Okay. Any other takers?
8%.
Birds of a feather?
8 hours, 8%.
8%.
8.
8%. Oh, more reasonable. Thank you. Thank you. No, let's give it to the greedy person, yeah? We raised it by 20% too. First year we improved. We were not with high fidelity, but to 10%, and another year we moved it to 20%. And you know what? Even after the researchers are long gone, the professor is convinced that we will keep with this. So they're still using it, and the data is at 20%. Just a surgical intervention, and it creates a big effect. So let's look at the mechanisms, right? So this is what's happening here. I've already talked about activation. So these are the 4 A's of learning. When you go straight into direct instructions, direct telling, you're leaving a lot of, trying to activate the knowledge and connecting with the new knowledge entirely up to the learner. So what we're doing in productive failure, we're using a failure-based protocol to activate your priors, a relevant prior knowledge. And as I said, that's important because A, it helps you see, it prepares you to see things, and it helps you to process new information better, and it helps you connect new information too. So on all 3 levels, activation is very key. And we do that deliberately. The instruction comes later, but the activation is by itself. Right? What that does, it creates an awareness. It creates an awareness in the learner that there's a gap. I tried A, B, C, D, E. Yeah, very interesting, but I did not get to the correct answer. There's a gap. Just the awareness of a gap is very critical. It's an important mechanism for learning. Because what that does, as to human psychology, is it creates an affect. When you know there is a gap, especially when you've tried it and not reached it, you want to close that gap. So when we measure things like situational interest in wanting to learn the correct solution, how engaged they are in wanting to learn, when the teacher's actually teaching, how motivated they are, the kinds of questions they ask are more why-oriented, and so on and so forth, you see that the affective state, the positive affect state, is very strong. They want to learn, as opposed to just coming to a lecture, yeah, it's a new thing, and I want to learn. Okay? But there's a negative affect state as well. Because going through this can be frustrating. I tried one thing, it didn't work. I tried another, it still doesn't work. Right? It can be frustrating. It can also tell, people can feel emotions like shame or guilt. Why can't I solve this? Even as a teacher, if you've told them, look, the objective is not to get to the correct answer, people are so used to the other sets of expectations that they feel, I'm not getting it. So it can be negative emotions as well. A bit of stress. But what we found when we've studied the emotional roller dynamics, not all positive emotions are correlated with learning outcomes. And not all negative emotions are negatively correlated. Some level of frustration, some level of anxiety, some level of stress, in that safe space, negative emotions can actually be positive for learning. And again, we can go into the physiological, neuroscientific aspects of it. They're in the book, if you have it. But the affective, priming the affective state, both in the positive mechanisms and also in the negative aspects, both are very, very strong mechanisms that once your knowledge system is activated, once you're aware of the gap, and your affective state is nicely primed, if at that stage a teacher comes along, an expert comes along and assembles it, that's what turns the failure into something productive. Okay? These are not mechanisms that are only invoked in productive failure. These are basic mechanisms that are everywhere. If you're just right now in this lecture, same mechanisms are at play. What design does is it optimizes how these mechanisms are involved. So for example, if I want to design a car, I can design a Volvo, or I can design an F1 car. The same scientific mechanisms, the laws of science will be the same. You have to have the same theories of thermodynamics and mechanics and all of that operating for a Volvo that also operate for an F1. But the design by which those two things are invoked optimizes them for different things. So don't take this as, oh, these are specific to productive failure. They are in every learning situation. You want to activate knowledge. You want learners to have an awareness of a gap, and so on and so forth. It's how strongly you invoke optimizes certain other things, what you want. Okay? So what are some implications for education? Our current model, for the large part, is something like this. You have theory and you have practice. And we are largely oriented towards, and the PF-based model is, you can think of it as a flipping of that model, right? You're used to, in the application context, so you teach them a lot because you think knowledge has to come first, application has to come second, fundamental problems with that, but it's in an application mode. You do your capstones, you do your projects, you do your masters, all of that. That's in the application mode. We're only looking at one mode of learning, theory to practice application. But if you use a PF-based model, you can put practice first. So what you saw kids do earlier with mathematics is actually very similar to the mathematical practice of mathematicians. When I talk to my mathematics colleagues and I say, when you solve new problems, what's your failure rate? And they say 95%, if at all. I get there. So, it's always about inventing new solutions. And you've created that safe space for kids to experience that practice, right? And then the theory can come in and consolidate. Because what you're doing then is you're looking at learning as practice as a preparation for learning. The application mode is still important, right? I said practice can be a preparation for learning, and after you've learned it well, you can still apply it more formally. So that still stays. But what we're optimizing is your preparatory aspects are missing in much of how we design education. And because of that, we are missing some of these fundamental mechanisms of activation, awareness, affect. We think that if we just do good assembly, if we just do good assembly by showing you how the toy works and please learn, that would be enough. And it is not. I want to talk a little bit about disambiguating learning versus performance. They are not the same. We make inference from one to the other, but they're not the same. And I kind of alluded this earlier when I was talking about scaffolding, right? And people say, like, okay, how do I differentiate between the two? So when you're trying to learn something new, your immediate performance is going to suffer. If you don't know swimming and I get you into the pool, not the deep end, in a safe way, you're going to suffer. You're going to struggle. If you're learning math or science or something new, if you're in the learning zone, if it's designed well, you will struggle. You will fail. Okay? Performance dips. So when the performance dips does not mean it's automatically equal to low learning, right? And that's why I create a 2x2. So imagine these are orthogonal, which they are. So you can have these four possibilities where you have performance is either low or high, and learning is either low or high, or shallow or deep, however you want to call it. So sometimes when we design learning, you have low performance and low learning. This happens when we do pure discovery. So everything that I've said is not about pure discovery. Like, we don't just say, go figure this out on your own. That's a terrible way of designing learning. Okay? If I had given the toy, the group one for the toy, and I said, and after that, no consolidation, no assembly, and I said, just go figure this out on your own, not a very good way to learn. very good to play, very good as preparation for learning, but not very good for learning. Right? It's good preparation. Right? So pure discovery is when you get unproductive failure. There's no performance, no learning. Right? Sometimes you get a performance dip. You're not getting to the correct answer. You're trying many things. You're struggling. But the deep learning is there. And that's called? I've been talking about for 50 minutes. That's called full active failure. Okay, that was a terrible failure. All right. So when initial performance dips, but there is the locus of deep learning, that's productive failure. Right? Of course, there are cases where there's productive success, when performance and learning are aligned. And this typically this typically happens when you look at experts. They're in the zone, they're performing, they're taking on challenging tasks, they're using their tools and everything that they know to solve these problems effortlessly, or sometimes not effortlessly as well, right? That's productive failure. That's productive success. But what's the biggest beast there is when there is an illusion of learning in high performance. This goes back to not just AI. AI can help you perform well, but that does not mean it's learning. Our learning methods can help you pass exam, but that does not mean there's deep learning there. Right? So there's an illusion of deep learning in high performance that cuts across many of the things that we do in education, at least in the initial design of education. Right? And that's what I call unproductive success. Thank you.